Robert Whittaker will fight his next fight against Dricus du Plessis at UFC 290 in Las Vegas. After that fight he might face Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 294. Hello fighters. This is World of MMA. In today's video I will give a prediction on a potential fight between Khamzat Chimaev and Robert Whittaker. But before I start the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it, so you won't miss the next videos. Here we go. Khamzat Chimaev stormed into the UFC. In recent history, since the promotion moved away from one-day tournaments, no one has managed to get 2 wins in 10 days. And not just any victory, but 2 bright and early victories. And what's even more amazing is the special attitude of Dana White, who doesn't even deny it. The UFC boss has confirmed it repeatedly. Khamzat, who was born in the Chechen Republic, moved to Sweden when he was 19 and fights for the Scandinavians. But back to MMA. After his bright debut, Boers got Gerald Meerschaert. But before that fight, the next one against the famous Damian Maia was already being discussed. The Brazilian was the 7th ranked fighter of the time, and beating him could make Khamzat even more popular. The Swede hardly needed a hype, because he is already well known to MMA fans after his outstanding debut. But a victory over an eminent opponent is another matter, because Chimaev's first 2 opponents in the UFC had only 1 victory under their belt. Meerschaert, Chimaev won by 1 punch in fact, and many said that Gerald was another sack. Tell that to Makhmud Muradov, whom the American strangled, interrupting the Uzbek fighter's streak of 14 wins. Khamzat never got the fight with Maia. He got coronavirus, recovered for a long time, and even announced the end of his career. It's a shame, because at that time it was already announced his fight against Leon Edwards, a victory over which would have practically guaranteed Boers a title shot. We had to start all over again, but in 3 fights Chimaev made such a strong statement that after more than a year of downtime, Boers got an opponent from the 11th ranked welterweight division. Khamzat didn't dominate Gene Liang, he outright humiliated him. Caught him, carried him to the goal, while conversing with White, beat him and choked him. Once again without missing a beat. Many had talked about an aura of invulnerability before, but after the fight against the Chinese, that talk intensified. In April last year, Khamzat faced former title challenger and at the time fighter ranked number 2 in the division, Gilbert Burns. Chimaev missed more punches than he had in his entire career, exchanged a lot of punches with his opponent, fell, and completely backed away from the game plan. But most importantly, Boers showed his spirit, and 15 minutes later he scored his first career win by decision. Having beaten Burns, Khamzat had to go into the fight against Stockton gangster Nate Diaz. The fight was supposed to be at welterweight, but Khamzat was unable to make the weight due to his doctor forbidding him to raise the remaining pounds. As a result, Diaz refused to fight Chimaev, and experienced welterweight Kevin Holland came out against the Chechen. But this fight was held at intermediate weight. Khamzat started the fight with a struggle and again finished it in the first round by strangling Holland. Robert Whittaker made his way to the world's strongest promotion through a successful performance on The Ultimate Fighter, which he won in 2012. Robert began his journey in the UFC as a welterweight, where he didn't do well and where he lost even to Court McGee. But after moving up to a heavier weight class in 2014, the career of the Australian fighter obviously began to take off. Coming into the fight against Clint Hester as the underdog, he easily broke his opponent in the stand-up and knocked him out in the 2nd round. Whittaker then went undefeated for 5 years, going on a streak of 9 straight wins. Especially noteworthy was his 2-fight split decision over Yoel Romero, both of which were among the best fights in the history of the middleweight division. It was in the fight with Romero, Robert won the championship belt, which he then very quickly lost to Adesanya in October 2019, losing by knockout already in the 2nd round. But even that defeat didn't knock out the Australian athlete. He made the right conclusions and started stamping wins again, eventually earning a 2nd fight with Israel. The rematch took place in February of last year, and it was a much closer fight. Whittaker showed once again his high fighting IQ by betting on wrestling and taking the 4th and 5th rounds by means of it. But it wasn't enough. and the belt stayed with the former owner. However, stylistically, Robert is first and foremost a puncher, who began his martial arts journey with karate. In the aspect of striking technique, Whittaker is definitely one of the strongest fighters of the middle division, second in this component, perhaps, only to Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. The Australian can work both as a first choice and a powerful counterattack. In the context of the upcoming fight, it is worth to pay attention to the defense against takedowns, and Whittaker is unrivaled in his weight class. Especially telling was his fights against Derek Brunson and Marvin Vettori, who never managed to take a single takedown and had to fight in the stand-up and lose. Let's move on to Robert Whittaker's wrestling background. The Australian is a black belt in BJJ. However, he fights his fights in the stand-up. But against punchers, if he loses on the hands, he uses transfers and control. Sometimes he uses different submissions. For example, in his second fight against the champion Adesanya, he had some takedowns and controlled the champ. In his fight against Marvin Vettori, he preferred to fight in a stand-up position and defended successfully against takedowns. Marvin didn't have any success with the Aussie. Now let's move on to Khamzat Chimaev. He's probably one of the strongest wrestlers in the UFC. In almost all his fights, he transfers his opponents and brings down the ground and pound. Or he uses some sort of submission. But when he can't get his opponent to transfer, he gets in trouble. That was evident in his fight with Gilbert Burns. Because of the Brazilian's good defense against takedowns, Khamzat had to fight in the stand-up, where he nearly lost to Burns. I'm going to choose Khamzat as the favorite in this aspect of the fight, because he uses a lot of wrestling in all his fights. Let's start with Khamzat Chimaev. In his fight with Gilbert, it was noticeable that he should improve his striking skills, as the base grappler was able to outwork Khamzat on his hands. He was missing a lot of unnecessary punches. However, he was also able to land good punches himself, especially from his distinguished by his knockout punch. In the fights with Ikram and Gerald, we saw that if he hits right on target, then his opponent will fall to the canvas. Now on to Robert's striking technique. Whittaker is a black belt in karate and hapkido. He's outclassed a lot of punchers on his hands. Some experts claim he won his second fight against Adesanya. That's my opinion too. Against wrestlers like Khamzat, he works well at distance, punching jabs and hooks. He's been able to beat almost the entire top middleweight division, even though he's a natural welterweight himself. The favorite here will clearly be Robert, who is far superior to Khamzat. In terms of experience and cardio, the advantage here will go to Robert. The Australian has had a lot of championship fights and 5-round fights where he looked fresh in the last rounds. He's fought top middleweights and beat them, but Khamzat, who is just moving up to middleweight, has not. I think Robert Whittaker is going to win this fight. I think it will be a repeat of the Vettori fight. Robert will defend against takedowns, keep Khamzat at a distance, and outbid him in his arms. In the end, the Australian will win by unanimous decision of the judges. What do you friends think? Write your opinions in the comments. Bye all.